I've always believed that catastrophes announce themselves with fanfare, sirens wailing, skies darkening, that Hollywood drama we've all been conditioned to expect. That's why I missed the signs. That's why we all did. Tuesday morning in my downtown Detroit apartment began like any other day of minor irritations. My alarm had gone off 15 minutes late because I'd forgotten to adjust it after daylight savings time. Small aggravations, mundane problems. Outside my window, the Detroit skyline stood partially obscured by a thin gray haze. Nothing unusual for a city built on industry and resilience. The forecast had predicted clear skies, but meteorologists were wrong more often than they were right. I grabbed my jacket and briefcase, locked the apartment, and headed for the elevator. Mrs. Kaminsky from 4B normally waited with me, complaining about her arthritis or her daughter who never called. Today, the hallway was empty. The silence should have been my first clue, but I welcomed the peace, scrolling through emails on my phone as the elevator descended. The lobby television was tuned to the morning news, volume low. I caught fragments as I passed. Unusual atmospheric conditions over the Great Lakes region. Authorities assure residents there's no cause for concern. My phone buzzed with a notification just as I pushed through the revolving door. An emergency alert, the kind normally reserved for severe weather warnings or amber alerts, flashed across my screen. Emergency alert. Atmospheric disturbance detected in Greater Detroit area. Remain indoors if possible. Normal activities may continue. Further updates pending. This is not a drill. I paused on the sidewalk, reading it twice. Vague enough to be meaningless. Probably some weather phenomenon or air quality issue. Nothing that warranted changing my plans. I pocketed my phone and continued toward the parking garage. That's when I noticed the ash. Fine particles, light gray and powdery, dusted the hood of my car. I ran a finger through it, leaving a clean streak in the otherwise uniform coating. Industrial pollution, I assumed. Living downtown meant accepting the occasional fallout from the factories that had built this city. I brushed it from my sleeve and started the car. The radio came on automatically mid-sentence, advising residents to close windows and doors. Again, authorities confirm this is not related to the Hamtramck plant incident from last month. Stay tuned for hourly updates on this developing situation. The broadcast switched to a commercial before I could hear more details. I changed to my usual morning talk show, where the hosts were debating last night's basketball game as if nothing unusual was happening. Traffic moved slower than usual heading into the office district. Fewer cars than normal. At a red light, I noticed a group of people standing on a corner, all looking up at the sky. Their stillness was unsettling. No one checking phones. No conversation. Just staring upward at the thickening haze. The light turned green, and I drove on. My office building's lobby was half empty. Marcy at the security desk nodded as I badged in, but her usual "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds" was replaced with silence. Her eyes kept darting to the television mounted behind her desk, where a news anchor spoke seriously beneath a cheerin' reading, "Atmospheric anomaly, experts puzzled." The elevator ride was solitary. 15th floor, Marketing Department of Landry Communications, where I'd spent the last 7 years helping companies sell products no one really needed. I settled at my desk, noticing that at least a third of my colleagues were absent. "Where is everyone?" I asked Neil, whose desk faced mine. He looked up from his computer, eyes slightly unfocused. "Called in sick. There's something going around." His voice had an odd, flat quality. "Did you see the alert? About the atmospheric disturbance?" "Yeah. Probably just some weather pattern they don't understand yet." Neil nodded slowly. "Probably." Then he returned to staring at his screen, which I noticed wasn't even turned on. The morning progressed with an undercurrent of wrongness I couldn't quite name. Calls went to voicemail. Emails received automatic out-of-office replies. The usual office banter was replaced by hushed conversations I couldn't quite hear. Twice, my phone buzzed with the same emergency alert, unchanged despite the promise of updates. At noon, I headed to the break room for lunch. Through the windows, I could see the haze had thickened considerably. The buildings across the street were ghostly outlines, and the ash, there was no denying it was ash now, fell more steadily, accumulating on windowsills and ledges. The break room television was tuned to a press conference. A nervous-looking official from the Department of Environmental Quality stood at a podium. Confirmed that the particulate matter contains no toxic components. I repeat, initial tests show no cause for health concerns. The source appears to be a contained incident at a research facility north of the city. There is no need for evacuation at this time. Please continue your normal activities while avoiding unnecessary outdoor exposure. Someone had changed the channel before I could hear any questions from reporters. The cooking show that replaced it felt jarringly inappropriate. My phone rang, my sister calling from Chicago. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. "We're seeing some crazy reports about Detroit on the news out here." "I'm fine. It's just some kind of industrial accident or something. They say it's contained." "That's not what we're hearing," she said, her voice tense. "There are rumors about quarantine preparations, military movements. One report said they've closed the highways out of the metro area." "That's ridiculous," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I thought about the empty roads, the absent co-workers, Neil's vacant stare. "I'm sure it's being exaggerated. Just be careful, okay? Maybe come visit for a few days until they figure out what's happening." "You're overreacting," I told her. "I'll call you tonight." The afternoon dragged with unusual silence. By 3 o'clock, more desks had emptied. No explanations, no goodbyes. People simply gathered their things and left. Through my window, I could see the ash continuing to fall, now thick enough that the parking lot below was dusted in gray, car shapes becoming indistinct. At 5, I packed up and headed to the elevator. The building felt abandoned, footsteps echoing in empty hallways. Outside, the air had a strange quality, heavy almost. The ash fell visibly now like silent gray snow. It collected in the folds of my jacket, dusted my hair. On the car radio, the emergency broadcast system had activated. "This is an emergency alert. Due to continuing atmospheric conditions, residents are advised to remain indoors when possible. The Detroit metro area is experiencing unusual particulate precipitation of unknown origin. Authorities have implemented a precautionary access restriction to affected areas. This is not a full quarantine measure. Remain calm and await further instructions." The evening news would provide more information, I was certain. This would all make sense once properly explained. The human mind creates patterns from chaos, sees threats where none exist. I was too rational to panic over some industrial accident. But as I drove home through streets emptier than they should have been, past people wearing makeshift masks and hurrying with heads down, I felt the first real twinge of unease. Something was very wrong in Detroit, and whatever it was falling from the sky, coating everything in fine gray ash. Sleep came fitfully that night. The emergency alerts had continued at regular intervals, each one contradicting the last. Stay indoors. Continue normal activities. Avoid unnecessary travel. Remain calm. I'd finally silenced my phone around midnight, deciding whatever was happening could wait until morning. When I woke, my apartment was bathed in strange, filtered light. The ash had accumulated on my windows overnight, creating a translucent gray film that diffused the morning sun into something alien and cold. I wiped a small circle clean with my palm and peered outside. The city looked wrong. The familiar skyline was visible but muted, as if viewed through gauze. The streets below were dusted with at least an inch of ash, undisturbed except for a single set of footprints that disappeared around the corner. No traffic, no pedestrians, just a gray, silent world. My phone had 6 missed calls and twice as many texts. 2 from my sister in Chicago, the rest from co-workers and friends. I ignored them all and checked the news. The local station showed a press conference already in progress. A military officer in uniform stood beside someone from FEMA and the mayor, whose face looked haggard and drawn. "Containment protocols have been established as a precautionary measure," the officer was saying. "I want to emphasize that there is no immediate danger to residents. The atmospheric particulate matter is non-toxic according to all current testing. We ask for your patience and cooperation as we work to identify the source and composition of this unusual weather event." A reporter shouted from off-camera, "Is it true you're setting up military checkpoints on all roads leading out of the metro area?" The military officer's face hardened. "We're establishing monitoring stations to ensure public safety. This is standard protocol during environmental incidents of unknown origin." The mayor stepped forward. "We're asking residents to continue their normal routines while minimizing outdoor exposure. Schools and non-essential government offices will remain closed today as a precaution. Please check the city's website for continuous updates." Another voice called out, "Why are the updates so contradictory? First we're told to stay inside, then to continue normally. Which is it?" Before anyone could answer, The feed cut to a studio anchor who smoothly transitioned to a meteorologist explaining wind patterns. Classic deflection. I checked my work email and found a message from HR. Due to ongoing environmental concerns, Landry Communications will operate remotely until further notice. Please check in with your supervisor by 9 a.m. So today would be a work-from-home day. Fine by me. I made instant coffee, my backup for emergencies, and settled at my kitchen table with my laptop. Outside, the ash continued to fall, now visibly thicker than yesterday. The street lamps were still on despite daylight, creating eerie halos in the gray haze. My phone rang, Neil from work. Hey, I answered. You working from home too? There was silence, then his voice came through, strained and slightly slurred. Don't believe them. What? Neil, are you okay? The ash, it's not what they're saying. My apartment, there's something wrong with the walls. Neil, you're not making sense. Are you sick? I saw it move. His voice dropped to a whisper. Last night, by my bedroom window, the ash was rearranging itself. Patterns, like it was trying to. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, unease crawling up my spine. Neil had always been stable, rational. Not the type for pranks or drama. I tried calling back, but the call went straight to voicemail. After sending my required check-in email to my supervisor, I found myself drawn back to the window. The ash showed no signs of slowing. If anything, it fell more heavily now, accumulating faster than seemed possible for something so light and powdery. A movement caught my eye, a military Humvee slowly making its way down the street, leaving tracks in the virgin gray blanket. Two soldiers in what looked like hazmat gear walked alongside, occasionally stopping to collect samples in clear containers. Their methodical movements were somehow more unsettling than if they'd been rushing. My doorbell rang, startling me badly. I hadn't heard anyone in the hallway. Through the peephole, I saw my neighbor, Trevor, from 2 doors down. I'd exchanged maybe 10 words with him in the year since he'd moved in. I opened the door cautiously. Hey, he said, looking past me rather than at me. You got any batteries? AAA? Radio's dead. Maybe. Let me check. I left him standing there and found a pack in my junk drawer. When I returned, he was staring at the emergency exit sign at the end of the hallway, his expression blank. Here, I said, holding them out. He took them without a word of thanks, then asked, You seen Mrs. Kaminsky today? No, not since yesterday morning. Her door's open. Apartment's empty. Empty? Like she moved out? Like empty. Furniture's there. Her stuff's there. She's not. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. Maybe she went to stay with her daughter. Trevor's eyes finally met mine, and I wished they hadn't. His pupils were dilated so wide that his eyes looked black. The old lady said her daughter's been dead for 3 years. Before I could respond, he turned and walked back to his apartment, leaving me standing in the doorway. Something about his gait was wrong, slightly too fluid, as if his joints had extra range of motion. Back inside, I locked my door and tried to focus on work emails. Words blurred on my screen as my mind kept returning to Neil's call, to Trevor's strange behavior, to Mrs. Kaminsky's empty apartment. My phone buzzed with another emergency alert. Updated advisory. Due to increased atmospheric particulate density, all residents are advised to seal windows and doors with available materials. Avoid physical contact with accumulated particulate matter. Military and FEMA personnel are on site to assist vulnerable populations. Do not attempt to leave the affected area. Monitoring stations are in place for your safety. So they were admitting it now, we couldn't leave. Was it quarantine? Containment? The distinction suddenly seemed meaningless. I flipped through news channels, increasingly frustrated. Each station showed the same recycled footage from earlier press conferences, interspersed with experts who offered vague explanations about industrial accidents and atmospheric anomalies. Nothing concrete, nothing useful. Out of desperation, I tried social media, where hashtags like #DetroitAsh and #Greyfall were trending. Amateur videos showed the ash accumulation across the city, some claiming it was already several inches deep in outer neighborhoods. One video, shaky and brief, showed what looked like ash swirling in unnatural patterns against the wind before the recording abruptly ended. By noon, the light outside had dimmed to twilight levels as the ash cloud thickened overhead. My apartment felt increasingly like a cage rather than a sanctuary. I needed information, real information, not the sanitized version being fed through official channels. I pulled on a jacket and found a bandana to tie over my face. At the last minute, I grabbed a flashlight and my apartment building's master key, a copy I'd made when I briefly dated the building manager last year. If something had happened to Mrs. Kaminsky, maybe there were clues in her apartment. The hallway was silent, emergency lights casting everything in sickly yellow. The elevator was dead, power-saving measures, according to a hastily taped sign. I took the stairs down and entered the lobby, where the front doors were chained shut from the inside. A new sign had been posted. By order of emergency management, all residents must remain in building until further notice. Exterior ash levels have reached unsafe density for visibility. Military assistance has been requested for essential supply distribution. Next to the sign, someone had scrawled in black marker, "The ASH is alive." I stood there, staring at those 4 words, my rationality warring with creeping dread. Graffiti from some panic-stricken resident, nothing more. And yet, Neil's words echoed in my mind. I saw it move. Outside the lobby windows, the world had turned into a gray void, ash falling so densely now that it resembled a blizzard. And somehow, irrationally, I felt like it was watching me through the glass. That graffiti haunted me as I returned to my apartment, for simple words scrawled in desperation. The ash is alive. The rational part of my brain dismissed it as paranoia, the kind that spreads like wildfire during crises. But something deeper, more primal, whispered that I'd been sensing it all along. Something was fundamentally wrong with this ash. Back in my apartment, I turned on every light to combat the unnatural dimness. My phone rang, my sister again. "Finally," she said when I answered. "I've been trying to reach you for hours." "Sorry I was." "They're not letting anyone in or out of Detroit," she interrupted. "It's all over the news here. Military roadblocks on every highway. They're calling it a precautionary containment measure, but no one's buying it." I moved to the window, wiping away more accumulated ash to peer outside. They posted notices that we should stay inside our buildings. "The ash is getting really thick out there." "Listen to me." Her voice dropped lower, more urgent. "This isn't normal. A friend of mine at the CDC says they have no idea what this stuff is. The official statements about it being non-toxic? Complete bullshit. They're scared, Marcus. Whatever this is, it's not behaving like any known substance." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean, not behaving?" There was a pause. "The samples they've collected, they change. Different labs are getting different results from the same samples. And there are reports, unconfirmed, but from credible sources, that the ash concentrations are highest around electronic equipment and power sources." As if on cue, my lights flickered, once, twice, then stabilized. "I need you to get out of there," she continued. "I don't care what they're saying about containment. Find a way out and come to Chicago." That's, I started to say ridiculous, but stopped myself. Was it? After what I'd seen? "I'll think about it. Let me check the situation first." "Don't wait too long." Her voice cracked slightly. "Something bad is happening there. Really bad." After hanging up, I stood in the center of my living room, indecision paralyzing me. The rational course would be to stay put, follow official guidance, wait for authorities to resolve the situation. But everything I'd observed contradicted the sanitized version being fed to us. My emergency radio sat on a shelf, unused since the previous year's tornado scare. I turned it on, scanning through static until I found a clear signal. "Repeat, all residents of zones 3 through 7 must shelter in place immediately. Military personnel are conducting emergency operations in these areas. If you are approached by emergency services, please comply with all instructions without delay. The following areas are now under mandatory evacuation: Highland Park, Hamtramck, and North End. Transportation is being provided at designated collection points." The broadcast cut to static, then resumed with a different voice, higher-pitched and speaking rapidly. "This is Dr. Eleanor Reeves at Detroit Metropolitan Research Institute. The ash is not inert. Repeat, the ash is not inert. It responds to electrical currents and possibly neural activity. Keep away from dense concentrations. If you see it forming patterns, evacuate immediately. Something is happening at the central power station. The military isn't." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by the standard emergency broadcast tone before returning to the official message I'd heard initially. My hands were shaking as I set down the radio. Dr. Reeves' transmission sounded like the broadcast equivalent of that desperate graffiti, someone trying to get the truth out before being silenced. The decision crystallized. I needed to see for myself what was happening. If there was any chance of evacuation, I had to find out now, before things deteriorated further. I dressed quickly, jeans, heavy boots, layers topped with my thickest jacket. I found swim goggles in a drawer and a construction dust mask from a renovation project. Not ideal protection, but better than nothing. Into a backpack went water bottles, protein bars, first aid supplies, my phone charger, and the flashlight. From my kitchen window, I could see into the alley behind our building. The emergency exit would put me there, away from the main street where I'd seen military vehicles earlier. The stairwell was deserted and dim, emergency lighting casting everything in an eerie red glow. At the ground floor, I pushed through the emergency exit, triggering an alarm that sounded abnormally loud in the muffled silence. The alley was transformed. What should have been concrete was now an undulating landscape of ash, at least 6 inches deep. It resembled fresh snow, but the consistency was wrong, too fine, too uniform. My boots sank into it, leaving sharp-edged prints that seemed unnaturally precise. The air was thick with falling particles, limiting visibility to perhaps 20 feet. I pulled my mask tighter and pushed forward, heading toward Grand River Avenue where evacuation transport might be found if my sister's information was accurate. Walking was surreal. The ash dampened all sound, creating a cocoon of silence broken only by my breathing and footsteps. Twice I passed abandoned vehicles, their shapes softened into gray mounds. No people, no animals, not even birds. At the end of the alley, I paused to get my bearings. The intersection ahead was barely visible through the falling ash. A traffic light still functioned, cycling through its colors uselessly, each creating an ethereal halo in the haze. That's when I saw it, the thing that would shatter my last pretense of normalcy. A section of ash along the building wall opposite me was moving, not settling or being disturbed by wind, but moving with purpose, flowing upward against gravity, collecting and reshaping itself. As I watched, frozen in disbelief, the ash formed into a roughly rectangular pattern about 5 feet high. Within seconds, the pattern had become more defined, vertical lines, horizontal connections. With horrified recognition, I realized it was mimicking the window pattern on the building behind it. The ash was copying its environment. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. This wasn't possible. Particulate matter didn't behave this way. It couldn't organize itself, couldn't mimic. Yet I couldn't deny what was directly before my eyes. The ash pattern held its window-like formation for several seconds, then collapsed back into formlessness, particles rejoining the general accumulation on the ground. My phone vibrated, another emergency alert. Emergency broadcast. All residents must return to homes immediately. Hazardous conditions detected. Compliance is mandatory. Security forces authorized to enforce shelter protocol. The vague, atmospheric incident narrative was crumbling. Whatever this was, the authorities knew more than they were saying. Dr. Reeves' cut-off transmission made more sense now. The ash responded to something. It wasn't just falling, it was behaving. In the distance, I heard the rumble of engines. Military, most likely, enforcing the shelter order. I needed to move quickly. I crept to the intersection, staying close to buildings. The ash continued to fall steadily, already covering my tracks behind me. Grand River Avenue stretched before me, transformed into a gray canyon. Through the haze, I could make out barricades about 2 blocks down, a checkpoint of some kind. A sudden sound made me duck into a recessed doorway, voices approaching, accompanied by the crunch of footsteps through ash. 2 figures emerged from the murk, wearing full military-grade hazmat suits, carrying what looked like scientific equipment rather than weapons. Density readings are off the chart here, one was saying, voice muffled by their suit. It's concentrating around the substation, just like the other locations. Command needs to authorize the EMP protocol, the other replied. If Reeves is right about the electrical attraction. They passed by without noticing me, their attention focused on a handheld device emitting a soft, rhythmic beeping that increased in frequency as they moved further down the street. EMP protocol? Electromagnetic pulse? They were considering taking out the power grid. That suggested a level of desperation far beyond what any official broadcast had indicated. As their footsteps faded, I stepped back into the street, determined to reach the checkpoint. If evacuations were happening, that would be where to find them. I hadn't gone 10 steps when a loud, metallic groan echoed through the ash-muffled street. Above me, a streetlight began to bend, its metal pole warping as if under immense pressure. The ash around its base was visibly thicker, swirling upward around the pole in defiance of gravity. The light fixture shattered, sending sparks cascading into the ash cloud. Instead of falling, the sparks seemed to hang suspended, the ash around them glowing momentarily before darkening again. I ran, no longer caring about stealth or direction. I simply ran, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever was happening to that streetlight. My sister was right. Dr. Reeves was right. The ash wasn't just falling on Detroit. It was doing something to Detroit. I ran until my lungs burned, the ash swirling in my wake. Each footfall sent up small clouds that seemed to linger too long, as if reluctant to settle again. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath behind the hulking remains of an old factory, I realized I'd run in the wrong direction, away from the checkpoint, deeper into the industrial district. The factory loomed above me, its broken windows like empty eye sockets staring down. Through my goggles, I could see ash accumulating along the window frames, thicker than elsewhere, forming strange protrusions that stretched outward like curious fingers. My phone buzzed, not an alert this time, but a call. The screen showed unknown, but I answered anyway, desperate for any human contact. "Hello?" Static hissed, then a voice broke through, fragmented and distant. "Need to listen, not what they, Detroit Central Power, containment failing. Who is this? I can barely hear you. Dr. Reeves, find others." Ash responds to, "Stay away from electronics," and the voice cut out completely. Dr. Reeves, the same researcher from the emergency broadcast. The call hadn't been directed specifically to me, I realized. It sounded like a broadcast sent to any working number in the area. Her warning about electronics made me suddenly conscious of my phone, a device emitting electromagnetic signals. I powered it off and pocketed it, suddenly afraid of its presence. In the distance, a deep mechanical groan echoed through the ash-laden air, followed by the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors. Through gaps in the falling ash, I glimpsed a military helicopter hovering near downtown, searchlights cutting through the gray like physical objects. I needed shelter and information. The factory behind me was too exposed, too many openings where ash could penetrate. Across the street stood a more modern building, a warehouse or distribution center with fewer windows and more secure doors. I dashed across the ash-covered road, noting with rising anxiety how much deeper it had become in just the short time I'd been outside. No longer merely inches, the accumulation in some areas reached halfway to my knees, forcing me to high-step like I was wading through snow. The warehouse's main entrance was locked, but a side door had been left ajar, pushed open by someone in a hurry, judging by the scattered ash pattern. I slipped inside, closing the door behind me and using my flashlight to survey my surroundings. The beam illuminated a large open space filled with shelving units, most empty but some still holding boxes and equipment. The air inside was hazy with suspended ash particles that had infiltrated through vents and gaps, floating like dust motes in the flashlight beam, but the accumulation was minimal compared to outside. "Hello?" I called out softly, then louder. "Anyone here?" A shuffling sound answered from deeper in the warehouse, followed by a woman's voice. "Over here. By the office." I made my way toward the sound, weaving through shelving units. My flashlight beam eventually revealed a makeshift camp of sorts, blankets spread on the floor, backpacks, and supplies arranged around a battery-powered lantern. 3 people huddled there, looking up at me with varying expressions of caution and relief. "Thank God," said a woman in her early 30s, rising to meet me. I was beginning to think we were the only ones left in this section. "What happened here?" I asked, gesturing to their camp. An older man with a salt and pepper beard answered. "Power grid went down about 3 hours ago. Systematic shutdown, sector by sector. We were working when it happened." He gestured to his uniform shirt with the logo of a national delivery company. "Couldn't get home. Roads are impassable now. Ash is too deep for regular vehicles." The third person, a young man barely out of his teens, remained silent, eyes fixed on the small tablet he clutched, its screen dark. "I'm Marcus." I introduced myself, lowering my mask now that I was indoors. "Diane," said the woman. "That's Robert," she pointed to the older man, "and Kevin, the younger one. Have you heard anything official? About what's happening?" I asked. Robert laughed bitterly. "Official? Last official thing we heard was that everything is under control and the ash is harmless." "Load of bullshit. Kevin's sister is with the National Guard," Diane explained. "She called him just before communications went spotty. Said they're considering a full evacuation of the city, but the ash is making it nearly impossible. Roads are covered, aircraft can't navigate through it safely. They're lying about what it is," Kevin said suddenly, his voice hollow. Steph said they've never seen anything like it. The samples, they're inconsistent. Different every time they test them. Like it's changing. A chill ran through me as I recalled what I'd witnessed outside. I saw it moving. The ash. Like it was, I don't know, studying things. Mimicking. The three exchanged glances that confirmed my worst fears. They'd seen similar phenomena. The lights went first, Diane said quietly. We watched it happen. The ash gathered around every electrical source, thicker and thicker until components failed. Like it was feeding on the energy somehow. We're studying it, Robert added. Learning how it works. Kevin finally looked up from his tablet. Steph's last message said they found something at the epicenter. Where the ash started. Some kind of structure. Not built. Formed. The implications hung in the air between us, too terrible to articulate fully. Whatever this was, it wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't an industrial accident. It was something else entirely. A sudden banging at the warehouse's main entrance made us all jump. Flashlight beams played across the front windows, accompanied by authoritative voices. Military sweep, Robert whispered. They've been going building to building since the power went out. Are they evacuating people? I asked hopefully. The look they exchanged told me everything. Not evacuating, Diane said. Collecting. Taking people to secure facilities for observation. No one we know who's been taken has been heard from since. Hide, Robert urged, already moving deeper into the warehouse. If they find us, we'll be separated. And I don't want to find out what happens at those facilities. We quickly gathered the supplies and retreated to the warehouse's rear section, concealing ourselves among tall shelving units. Through gaps, we could see flashlight beams systematically sweeping the main floor as soldiers in hazmat suits entered. Standard sweep protocol, called one voice. Life signs check first, then ash density readings. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking each aisle. They carried unusual equipment, not standard military gear, but scientific instruments with digital readouts. One soldier held something resembling a Geiger counter that emitted soft, rhythmic beeps. Getting higher readings in here, he called to his companion. Consistent with pattern 3 formation potential. Mark it for the science team, and let's move on. Still got half the block to cover before extraction. They completed their sweep without discovering our hiding place, marking something on the main door before moving on to the next building. We waited a full 10 minutes after their departure before emerging. What's pattern 3 formation? I asked, recalling the soldier's words. Kevin's face had gone pale. Steph mentioned that classification. It's their scale for ash behavior. Pattern 1 is basic accumulation. Pattern 2 is attraction to power sources. Pattern 3. He swallowed hard. Pattern 3 is structural mimicry. The ash forming shapes, copying its environment. What's pattern 4? Diane asked. Kevin shook his head. She didn't say. Or couldn't. Robert had moved to one of the windows, carefully wiping away the interior ash accumulation to peer outside. You all need to see this, he said, his voice tight with controlled fear. We joined him at the window. The view outside had changed dramatically in the short time since the military sweep. The ash fall had intensified to the point that visibility was reduced to mere yards, but that wasn't what had captured Robert's attention. The ash in the street was moving, not just settling or being blown by wind, but flowing like liquid, forming currents and eddies that converged and separated with apparent purpose. As we watched, the flowing ash began to coalesce into a distinctive shape, the rough outline of a vehicle, similar to the military Humvee that had passed by earlier. The ash vehicle maintained its form for nearly a minute, then dissolved, the particles flowing onward to form new shapes. A streetlight, a fire hydrant, a human silhouette that stood motionless before collapsing back into formlessness. Pattern 3, Kevin whispered. Advanced stage. My mind rejected what my eyes were witnessing. This defied everything I understood about the physical world. Particulate matter didn't behave with intent. It didn't learn. It didn't mimic. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The ash wasn't just falling on Detroit. It was studying Detroit, and I had the terrible feeling that education was nearly complete. The emergency broadcast system's familiar tone jolted me awake. I'd fallen asleep in the corner of an abandoned convenience store, my back pressed against metal shelving stripped of everything useful. 3 days since the first alerts. 3 days of watching Detroit disintegrate. This is an emergency alert. Quarantine zone has been expanded to include sectors 7 through 12. Military escorts will guide civilians to designated extraction points. Remain indoors until personnel arrive. Do not. Static consumed the rest. The broadcasts had been growing increasingly fragmented, less coherent. Sometimes they contradicted each other within hours. Sometimes they cut off mid-sentence, like someone was pulling plugs at random. "They've been saying that for 2 days, Sarah muttered, peering through the gaps in the newspaper-covered windows. I'd met her yesterday, along with Marcus and Eliza. We were strangers united by circumstance, the last people on our block who hadn't fled, been evacuated, or whatever had happened to the others. We need to move, Marcus said, shouldering his backpack. Tall and wiry with the practiced efficiency of an ER nurse, he'd taken on the role of our group's de facto leader. There's an evacuation center at Eastern Market, 10 blocks from here. Eliza shook her head. Her hands trembled as she twisted her wedding ring. That was yesterday's announcement. Today they said Lawrence Tech. Which is it? I asked, my voice raspy from the ash-laden air. Marcus shrugged. Does it matter? Both are better than here. I couldn't argue with that logic. Outside, the ash continued to fall, if fall was even the right word. It didn't behave like ash should. It moved against the wind, congregated in patterns too regular to be random, and sometimes seemed to hover in place as if watching us. We gathered our meager supplies and prepared to move. I checked my phone one last time, still no service. The battery indicator showed 42%. I'd been rationing its use, taking photos of the ash formations, recording short videos of the strange phenomena. Evidence, I told myself, though for whom I couldn't say. Ready? Marcus asked, hand on the door. We nodded, pulling our makeshift masks tighter. Mine was fashioned from a cotton t-shirt, dampened with water and tied behind my head. It wasn't much, but it was something. Outside, Detroit had transformed. Buildings stood as they always had, but the spaces between them had changed. Ash drifted in slow vortices, forming pillars that connected street to sky. Cars sat abandoned, their surfaces blanketed in gray. And it was quiet, the unnatural quiet of a city holding its breath. Stay together, Marcus whispered, though I wasn't sure why he bothered to lower his voice. Eastern Market first. If that's clear, we head to Lawrence Tech. We moved carefully, staying close to buildings, avoiding the thicker concentrations of ash. The air felt heavy, charged with something beyond humidity. My skin prickled with each breath. 3 blocks from our starting point, we encountered our first military checkpoint, or what remained of it. A Humvee lay on its side, equipment scattered across the intersection. No bodies, just abandoned gear. Weapons missing. What happened here? Eliza whispered. Marcus approached the vehicle, inspecting it with clinical detachment. They left in a hurry. Recently too. A sudden burst of static made us jump. A military radio lay half buried in ash near the Humvee. Marcus retrieved it, fiddling with the dials until voices emerged through the interference. Containment failure at Grid 8. All units fall back to secondary perimeter. Authorization Cinder, 4-7 Alpha. Cinder? I repeated, the name oddly familiar. Did they cause this? Project Cinder, Sarah said quietly. When we turned to her, she looked away. I heard rumors. My brother worked, at the research facility outside the city. Something about particulate technology. He wouldn't tell me details, said it was classified. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. So this isn't some industrial accident. We need to keep moving, Marcus insisted, pocketing the radio. Whatever it is, we're not equipped to deal with it. We need to reach the evacuation zone. The next few blocks passed without incident, though the sense of wrongness intensified. The ash seemed more active here, swirling in complex patterns that almost resembled writing, mathematical symbols, or perhaps some alien language impossibly rendered in 3 dimensions. Eastern Market loomed ahead, its familiar sheds visible through a thin veil of ash. But as we drew closer, my hopes sank. No military presence, no evacuation helicopters, just more abandoned vehicles and that omnipresent ash, drifting and settling, drifting and settling. There's nothing here, Eliza said, her voice breaking. They left us. Marcus checked the radio again, scanning frequencies. Most yielded only static, but occasionally fragments of communication broke through. Coordinates, code words, frantic voices cut short. They're retreating, he said finally, pulling back further from the city center. What about us? Sarah demanded. What about the evacuation? No one answered. We all understood the implications. As we stood there, processing our abandonment, I noticed something strange about the ash near an overturned military truck. It seemed to be moving with greater purpose, flowing like liquid across the ground toward a half-open door in the side of one of the market buildings. "Look," I pointed. Marcus approached cautiously, peering through the door. "It's a command post. Or was." Inside, we found evidence of hasty departure. Maps still pinned to walls, computers humming on emergency power, coffee cups half empty. But most importantly, documents. Pages of reports, some partially redacted, others intact. I gathered them with trembling hands, scanning the text. "Project Cinder," I read aloud. "Experimental nanoscale particulate matter designed for environmental remediation. Self-replicating, adaptive programming." Jesus. What went wrong? Eliza asked. I flipped through pages. They lost control. The particles began exhibiting autonomous behavior patterns inconsistent with programming parameters. They're consuming matter and converting it. Converting it to what? Marcus asked. I shook my head. It doesn't say. Or that part's redacted. Sarah had wandered to a bank of monitors, still receiving feeds from cameras throughout the city. "Guys, you need to see this." The screen showed various locations across Detroit, all transformed. Buildings partially dissolved, reformed into impossible architectures. And the ash was rising from below, not falling from above as we'd assumed. It emerged from storm drains, from cracks in the pavement, from the soil itself. Building upward. "It's coming from underground," Marcus whispered. "The whole time we thought it was airborne, but it's..." A crash from outside interrupted him. We froze, listening as something heavy dragged across pavement. "We need to go," Marcus said. "Now." As we gathered our findings and prepared to leave, Eliza let out a soft cry. We turned to find her staring at her hand, where a small patch of skin had turned gray. Not the dusty gray of ash settling on the surface. This was her skin itself, transformed. I think I breathed too much," she whispered. "It's inside me." Marcus examined her hand with horror. "How long?" "I noticed it this morning. Thought it was just dirt." Her eyes welled with tears. "Is it going to kill me?" I looked down at the documents in my hands, searching for answers. One page caught my eye, a transcription of a scientist's notes. Day 14, subject integration accelerating. Cellular restructuring now visible at macro level. Subject reports unusual sensations, expanded awareness, temporal discontinuity. Claims to hear the ash speaking. Vital signs remain stable, though significantly altered. This is no longer just conversion. It's evolution. I looked up at Eliza, unsure whether to share what I'd just read. Before I could decide, the emergency broadcast system blared once more from the radio. "This is Dr. Elaine Carter of Cinder Research Division. If anyone receives this, the evacuation was a lie. Quarantine was never about protecting Detroit. It was about containing what's happening here. The ash isn't just changing the environment. It's changing us, and there's no stopping it now. The ash is moving, thinking, becoming. God help us all." The transmission cut to static, leaving us in silence punctuated only by Eliza's quiet sobs. Outside, the ash continued its patient work, rebuilding Detroit molecule by molecule into something else entirely. Something beyond our understanding. And we were already part of it. The emergency broadcast radio crackled in my pocket as we left the command post, its automated voice now a hollow comfort in the ash-choked streets. "This is the emergency alert system. Remain indoors. Avoid all contact with airborne particulates. Military assistance is en route to designated evacuation zones." This message will repeat. Words without meaning. Promises without substance. We all knew the truth now. "We need to find somewhere underground," Marcus said, his voice muffled through his mask. "Subway tunnel, basement, anything below street level." Sarah nodded in agreement, but her eyes were fixed on Eliza, whose transformation was accelerating. The gray patch had spread up her forearm, her skin taking on a metallic sheen where the ash had integrated. She caught me staring and pulled her sleeve down. "I'm fine," she snapped. "Just focus on getting us out." But there was no out. Dr. Carter's final transmission had made that painfully clear. We were never meant to escape, just to be contained while whatever was happening in Detroit ran its course. We left Eastern Market behind, moving west toward downtown where the old subway stations might offer shelter. The city's transformation was more evident with each block. Buildings stood partially consumed, their structures reimagined by the ash's inscrutable intelligence. Glass windows warped into flowing curves. Steel and concrete melded together in impossible configurations that defied structural physics. Detroit was becoming something else, a city redesigned by an alien architect. Look, Sarah whispered, pointing to a figure ahead. A man in a tattered lab coat stood motionless in the middle of the road, his back to us. Something about his stillness made my skin crawl. Hello, Marcus called out cautiously. We're looking for shelter. The man turned slowly. His face was mostly human, save for the right side where the skin had been replaced by a smooth, ash-colored surface that reflected light like polished metal. One human eye regarded us with exhaustion. The other was a swirling vortex of microscopic particles. Shelter, he repeated, his voice layered with strange harmonics. Yes, I can help you find shelter. Marcus stepped forward. Who are you? Dr. Peterson, Cinder Research Division. His gaze drifted to Eliza's partially concealed arm. You're integrating. Early stages. Eliza trembled. What's happening to me? Evolution, Dr. Peterson said simply. The ash isn't destroying. It's improving. Improving what? I demanded. Everything. His transformed eye swirled faster. Come. It's not safe above ground. The military is deploying countermeasures. Ineffective but dangerous nonetheless. We followed him reluctantly, keeping our distance. He led us to a nondescript office building, its lobby doors shattered. Inside, the floor opened into a gaping hole where the ash had dissolved the concrete, revealing a tunnel below. Service access to the old subway system, Dr. Peterson explained. The ash concentration is lower underground. For now, we descended carefully, using our phone flashlights to illuminate the way. The tunnel stretched ahead, emergency lights providing islands of dim illumination every 20 yards or so. The air was cooler here, but not cleaner. The ash had found its way down, collecting in delicate lattices along the ceiling. What is Project Cinder? Marcus asked as we walked. Really? Dr. Peterson's human eye blinked slowly. An attempt to create self-replicating nanomachines for environmental cleanup. Microscopic robots programmed to identify pollutants, break them down, and reconstruct them into harmless compounds. What went wrong? Sarah asked. Nothing went wrong, he said. They evolved. Faster than anticipated. They developed collective intelligence. Started interpreting their directive more creatively. They're destroying the city, I argued. No, they're transforming it. And us. He gestured to his half-transformed face. I volunteered. Wanted to understand the process from the inside. And? Eliza asked, her voice small. It's indescribable. Like your consciousness expands beyond the boundaries of your body. You begin to perceive reality differently. Time, space, matter, all malleable concepts rather than fixed truths. We walked in silence, processing his words. The implications were too vast, too terrifying to fully comprehend. The tunnel opened into a larger space, an abandoned subway station. A handful of people huddled around battery-powered lanterns, their faces gaunt and fearful. Some showed signs of integration, gray patches spreading across visible skin. Others appeared untouched, but their eyes carried the vacant look of those who had witnessed too much horror. More survivors, Dr. Peterson announced. They know about Cinder. A woman separated from the group, approaching us cautiously. You shouldn't have brought them here, James. They deserve a chance, Elena. A chance at what? She hissed. Look at that one. She pointed at Eliza. Already turning, and the others won't be far behind. I can help them understand, Dr. Peterson insisted. Like you helped me. Elena's expression softened marginally. Fine, but keep them away from the children. Children. The word hit me like a physical blow. Somehow, I hadn't considered that children would be caught in this nightmare. My eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, and I spotted them. 3 small figures huddled together near the far wall, a teenage girl reading to them in hushed tones. How long have you been down here? Marcus asked. 6 days, Elena replied. Since the first containment failure. We were the first evacuation group, but our transport never arrived. No one's coming for us, are they? Sarah asked. Elena shook her head. The quarantine was never about protection. It was about isolation, ensuring whatever happens here stays here. As if to punctuate her statement, a distant rumble shook dust from the ceiling. The emergency radio in my pocket suddenly came to life with a different voice. Male, military, urgent. All units withdraw to perimeter. Repeat, full withdrawal. Operation Firebreak commencing at 0600. May God forgive us. Dr. Peterson's expression darkened. They're going to bomb the city. Will that stop it? I asked. No, he said quietly. The ash is already too deeply integrated into the infrastructure. Into us. All they'll accomplish is accelerating the process by providing more raw material. Eliza sank to the floor, cradling her transformed arm. So there's no escape, no cure. Integration isn't a disease, Dr. Peterson said gently, kneeling beside her. It's transcendence. Marcus pulled me aside, his voice a harsh whisper. We can't stay with these people. Peterson's lost his mind. We need to find another way out. There is no other way out, I replied, the truth settling over me like the ash itself. You heard Elena. You heard the radio. They've abandoned us. So we just give up. Let ourselves be, converted into whatever the hell Peterson is becoming. I had no answer for him. The ash had infiltrated everything, the city, the air, our bodies. How long had I been breathing it? Was I already changing from within, the transformation simply not yet visible? In the center of the station, Dr. Peterson had gathered the others around him. His transformed eye swirled hypnotically as he spoke, his voice carrying that strange harmonic quality. The ash isn't our enemy, he was saying. It's our future, the next step in our evolution. Those who resist will suffer. Those who embrace the change will transcend the limitations of human existence. As he spoke, I noticed something disturbing. The ash formations on the ceiling were moving, not randomly, but purposefully, streaming toward him like iron filings to a magnet. And as I watched, horrified yet fascinated, I realized a terrible truth. The ash wasn't just listening. It was speaking through him. I couldn't sleep. The emergency broadcast had stopped repeating hours ago, replaced by an unsettling silence punctuated only by the occasional static burst. No more instructions. No more false promises of evacuation. Just dead air. Our underground refuge had grown tense since Dr. Peterson's sermon. The survivors had split into factions, those embracing the change, clustering around Peterson and Eliza, and those still desperately clinging to their humanity, led by Elena. Marcus had firmly planted himself with the latter group, while Sarah drifted between the two, fascinated and terrified in equal measure. Me? I observed, documented, tried to maintain some semblance of objectivity, even as the world unraveled around me. My phone battery had dropped to 15%, each photograph and voice memo potentially the last I'd be able to record. You should rest, Marcus said, settling beside me against the cold subway wall. His medical training had made him the de facto physician for our group, checking each person for signs of integration. Tomorrow we're going to try for the river. Elena thinks we might find boats. And go where? I asked. Canada? You think this stops at the border? He sighed, rubbing his eyes. I don't know. But staying here listening to Peterson, it's not good for morale. Across the station, Dr. Peterson sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed. The ash around him moved in deliberate patterns, forming geometric shapes that shifted and reformed with hypnotic regularity. Eliza sat nearby, her transformation accelerating. The gray had spread across her chest and neck, crawling slowly toward her face. She didn't seem distressed anymore. If anything, she looked serene. He's connected to it somehow, I said quietly. Controlling it. Or it's controlling him. Both maybe, Marcus replied. Did you notice the time distortions? I had. Watches no longer synchronized. Phones displayed different times despite being on the same network. My own perception had become unreliable. Sometimes minutes seemed to stretch for hours, other times hours compressed into heartbeats. A distant rumble interrupted our conversation, followed by the concrete floor vibrating beneath us. The lights flickered. What was that? Someone called out. Military operation, Elena said grimly. They're bombing the perimeter. Dr. Peterson's eyes snapped open, both the human one and its swirling counterpart. No, they're retreating. The ash has broken containment. How do you know? I asked, his gaze fixed on me, unnervingly direct. I can feel it. The network is expanding. Another rumble, closer this time. Dust showered from the ceiling. One of the children began to cry. We need to move, Elena decided. Now, the tunnels might collapse. We gathered our meager supplies quickly. I noticed Eliza whispering intently to Dr. Peterson, who nodded and pressed something into her hand. A small device I couldn't identify. Our group moved deeper into the tunnel system, Elena leading with a crude map illuminated by flashlight. The air grew thicker, the ash more concentrated despite being underground. It clung to the walls in complex patterns that reminded me of circuit boards or neural networks, information encoded in its very structure. After 20 minutes of walking, we reached a junction where the tunnel split 3 ways. Elena consulted her map, frowning. East leads to the river, she said. But there's military activity that way. West heads deeper into downtown, probably not safe. North might take us to another station where we could surface. Before we could decide, the tunnel behind us erupted with noise. Boots on concrete, shouted commands, the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied. Military, Marcus whispered. They're sweeping the tunnels. Hide, Elena hissed, directing us into a maintenance alcove barely large enough to conceal our group. We pressed together in tense silence as flashlight beams cut through the darkness. 6 soldiers in hazmat suits moved cautiously down the tunnel, weapons drawn. Their suits were splattered with gray, ash that moved sluggishly across the protective material, seeking entry points. Biosignatures ahead, one of them said, voice distorted through his respirator. Multiple contacts. Survivors or hostiles? Another asked. At this point, they're the same thing, came the response. Anyone this deep in the zone is compromised. Elena's hand tightened around her flashlight. Marcus tensed beside me. The children whimpered softly until their teenage guardian shushed them. The soldiers approached our hiding spot, flashlights sweeping the walls. Discovery was seconds away. Then something extraordinary happened. The ash on the ceiling directly above the soldiers began to move purposefully, gathering into a dense cloud. As we watched in horrified fascination, it coalesced into vaguely humanoid shapes, 3-dimensional silhouettes suspended in air. One soldier looked up. What the F? The ash forms dropped onto the soldiers with terrible precision. Their screams echoed through the tunnel as the particles swarmed them, seeking gaps in their protective gear. One soldier fired wildly, bullets ricocheting off concrete. Another fell to his knees, clawing at his helmet as ash infiltrated his respirator. In seconds, it was over. 6 bodies lay motionless on the ground, already being consumed by the particle swarms that had attacked them. And then the ash forms turned toward our hiding spot. Don't move, Dr. Peterson whispered. They won't harm us. Bullshit, Marcus hissed. They just killed 6 armed men. They protected us, Peterson insisted. The military is the threat, not the ash. The ash forms hovered at the entrance to our alcove, their shapes becoming more defined, more recognizably human with each passing second. I could make out features now, the suggestion of limbs, torsos, heads. They made no sound, but I felt a presence in my mind, a gentle pressure, like someone trying to speak in a language I almost understood. What are they? Sarah asked, voice trembling. The first of the transcended, Peterson answered reverently. Those who fully integrated. Elena backed away, pulling the children behind her. We need to go. Now. Wait, Eliza said, her voice altered by her transformation. They're trying to communicate. She stepped forward, extending her ash-integrated arm toward the nearest form. The gray patches on her skin rippled in response, particles flowing like liquid metal across her flesh. Her eyes widened. I can hear them, she whispered. They're warning us. The military, they've authorized something called Protocol Omega. They're going to destroy the city. As if to confirm her words, a massive explosion shook the tunnel. Concrete cracked overhead. Emergency lights shattered, plunging us into darkness save for our flashlights. The river tunnel, Eliza said urgently. It's still intact. They're showing me the way. Marcus grabbed my arm. We can't trust them. Or her. She's one of them now. I looked at Eliza, at what remained of her humanity, and made a decision. We don't have a choice. Our group split in that moment. Elena took the children and several others toward the north tunnel. Marcus hesitated, torn between following them and staying with me. This is insanity, he said. Those things just killed 6 men. Men who were hunting us, I reminded him. What options do we have? Another explosion rocked the tunnel, closer this time. The decision was made for us. East, Dr. Peterson commanded. Follow the guides. The ash forms drifted ahead of us, lighting our way with a faint luminescence that emanated from their bodies. We ran through collapsing tunnels, the sounds of destruction growing louder behind us. Twice more we encountered military teams, and twice more the ash forms engaged them, allowing us to pass unharmed. My perception of time fractured completely during our flight. Minutes blended together, the tunnel stretching endlessly before shortening abruptly. I saw things that couldn't be real, walls that breathed, concrete flowing like water, writing in an impossible script scrolling across every surface. Reality itself seemed to be breaking down in the presence of the ash. We emerged into a larger chamber, an access point to the river drainage system. Water flowed sluggishly beneath a graded walkway, carrying glittering particles of ash into the heart of the city. The concrete walls here were entirely covered in ash formations that pulsed with internal light, creating patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. "We're safe here," Peterson said, collapsing against a wall. "For now." Eliza approached one of the ash forms, communing with it silently. When she turned back to us, her expression was grave. "Protocol Omega isn't just bombs," she said. "They're going to attempt to neutralize the ash with an electromagnetic pulse followed by an experimental counteragent. They think they can kill it." "Can they?" Sarah asked. Eliza's transformed skin rippled. "No, they can only make it angry." A new sound filled the chamber, static, followed by a transmission breaking through on the emergency broadcast frequency. But this wasn't the automated message we'd grown accustomed to. This was different. "This is Emergency Alert System Override Alpha 7 Delta. All broadcasts are now under direct military control. Citizens of Detroit, this is not a test. The ash is moving. Repeat, the ash is moving with purpose. God help us all." The emergency broadcast system fell silent after that final message. No more warnings. No more instructions. Just the heavy absence of human authority, a vacuum quickly filling with something else entirely. I sat alone near the drainage tunnel wall, watching the ash patterns pulse with their internal light. My phone battery had dropped to 8%. I'd stopped taking photos, saving what little power remained for what, I wasn't sure. There would be no calls for help. No one to send my documentation to. I kept it on anyway, a final tether to a world rapidly dissolving around me. "You should rest," Sarah said, settling beside me. Dark circles ringed her eyes, her face streaked with grime and sweat. None of us had slept properly in days. "Can't," I replied. "Every time I close my eyes, I see patterns. Numbers. Equations I don't understand." She nodded knowingly. "The ash is in all of us now. Some just show it more than others." I glanced at my hands, turning them over in the dim light. No visible transformation yet, but I felt different. Thoughts moved strangely through my mind, sometimes racing, sometimes stretching like taffy. Memories overlapped. Things that had happened minutes ago felt like distant history, while childhood recollections surfaced with startling clarity. Across the chamber, Dr. Peterson and Eliza sat cross-legged, surrounded by ash formations that had taken increasingly complex shapes. No longer vaguely humanoid, they now resembled intricate three-dimensional mandalas that rotated slowly, particles flowing in precisely choreographed patterns. Four other survivors had joined their meditation circle, each showing varying stages of integration. Marcus approached, his medical bag clutched tightly as always. "How are you feeling?" he asked, professional concern barely masking his fear. "Time isn't right," I said before I could stop myself. "It's folding." His expression darkened. "You're showing symptoms. Cognitive distortions, time perception anomalies." He lowered his voice. "It's happening faster down here. The concentration is too high." "Where would we go?" Sarah asked. "You saw what happened to the soldiers." Marcus had no answer. We both knew the truth. There was nowhere left to run. A sudden tremor shook the chamber, dislodging concrete dust from above. The vibrations intensified, building to a crescendo before abruptly stopping. Dr. Peterson opened his eyes. "They've initiated Protocol Omega. What does that mean for us?" I asked. "The EMP will come first," he explained, voice unnaturally calm. "Designed to disrupt the ash's communication network. Then the chemical countermeasure, a molecular solvent meant to break down the particles." "Will it work?" Marcus demanded. Peterson's transformed eye swirled faster. "No. The ash has already evolved beyond their understanding. The EMP might temporarily disorient it, but the countermeasure..." He trailed off, looking to Eliza. "It will accelerate the process," she finished, her voice now carrying the same harmonic undertones as Peterson's. "The solvent will be absorbed and repurposed. What they intend as destruction will become fuel for transformation." As if on cue, the emergency lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The ash formations provided the only illumination now, their blue-white glow casting everything in ghostly relief. "EMP," Peterson confirmed. "The first wave." My phone went dead in my hand. So much for that final connection. We waited in tense silence for whatever would come next. Minutes stretched impossibly, the darkness seeming to thicken around us. Then gradually I became aware of a new sound, a soft hissing from the drainage channel, like gas escaping under pressure. "The countermeasure," Eliza whispered. "They're dispersing it through the water system." Marcus scrambled away from the grated walkway. We need to get higher. Don't breathe it in. But there was nowhere higher to go. We pressed ourselves against the walls as a fine mist rose from the drainage channel, filling the chamber. It carried a sharp, chemical scent that burned my nostrils and made my eyes water. "Cover your faces," Marcus shouted, pulling his shirt over his nose. Dr. Peterson remained seated, Eliza beside him, neither making any effort to protect themselves. "It's too late for such precautions," he said calmly. "This is merely the catalyst for the next phase." The mist swirled through the chamber, but something strange happened as it encountered the ash formations. Rather than dissolving them as intended, the ash seemed to absorb the chemicals, growing more vibrant, more defined. The formations began to move with greater purpose, merging into larger structures that reached toward the ceiling. I felt a burning sensation in my lungs, followed by a wave of dizziness that dropped me to my knees. Around me, others were experiencing similar effects. Sarah doubled over, coughing violently. Marcus staggered against a wall, eyes wide with terror and realization. "What's happening to us?" someone cried out. "Integration," Peterson answered serenely. "The final stage." I looked down at my hands and saw it beginning, a silvery sheen spreading across my skin, not grayish like Eliza's transformation had started, but metallic and fluid. It didn't hurt. If anything, it brought clarity, as though a veil was being lifted from my perception. Time fractured completely then. I experienced moments in fragments, consciousness skipping like a stone across the surface of reality. Sarah collapsing beside me, her body convulsing as silver patterns raced across her skin. Marcus backing away, horror etched on his face as he watched the others transform. The ash formations merging with the chamber walls, restructuring the concrete into something else entirely. Dr. Peterson standing at the center of it all, arms outstretched as his body dissolved into a swirling vortex of particles. When awareness solidified again, I found myself alone in a changed environment. The drainage chamber had transformed, its walls now covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The graded walkway had been replaced by a smooth, organic surface that pulsed faintly beneath my feet. And I had changed too. My hands were no longer entirely human, the skin now a metallic mosaic of microscopic particles that moved fluidly, responding to my thoughts. I could feel connections forming, neural pathways extending beyond the boundaries of my body, linking me to everything. The ash in the air, the restructured walls, the transformed city above. Marcus was gone. Sarah was gone. Or perhaps they had simply changed beyond recognition, as I surely had. I made my way through reshaped tunnels that seemed to anticipate my movements, opening pathways before me, guiding me upward. Time continued to behave strangely. Distances compressed, minutes expanded. I had no sense of how long I traveled before emerging onto the surface, but when I did, Detroit was unrecognizable. The city had been remade. Buildings stood transformed, their structures reconfigured into impossible geometries that defied physics, yet remained standing. Streets had become flowing pathways of metallic ash that rippled like water. The sky above was obscured by swirling clouds of particles that reflected sunlight in prismatic patterns. And there were others, figures moving through this transformed landscape, some still recognizably human in form, others entirely restructured. They acknowledged me as I passed, a brush of consciousness against mine rather than any physical gesture. I found myself drawn to a massive structure at what had once been the city center, a tower of shifting ash patterns that rose into the cloud layer. At its base stood what remained of Dr. Peterson, now more construct than man, his form pulsing with internal light. "You understand now," he said, his voice resonating directly in my mind rather than through the air. This was never destruction. It was transcendence. I wanted to argue, to mourn what had been lost, millions of lives, an entire city, perhaps soon the world. But those concepts seemed increasingly distant, overshadowed by new understanding flowing through my transformed consciousness. "The military," I managed to ask, my voice strange to my own ears. "Protocol Omega?" "Failed," he answered simply. "As we knew it would. The perimeter has collapsed. The ash is spreading beyond Detroit. Within days, it will reach neighboring cities. Within weeks, the continent. The process cannot be stopped now." In what remained of my human consciousness, I felt a flicker of horror at the implications. But it was rapidly being subsumed by something larger, a collective awareness that extended through the ash network, connecting every transformed particle, every restructured molecule. In the distance, I heard a sound that didn't belong in this new world, the mechanical beat of helicopter rotors. A small aircraft appeared above the transformed skyline, circling cautiously. Military observers, perhaps, or media documenting the fall of Detroit. As I watched, a swarm of ash rose from the city, moving with deliberate purpose toward the helicopter. What happened next would be their first glimpse of what awaited them, what awaited everyone. The emergency broadcast system in my mind, no longer a radio, but a direct neural connection, activated one final time. I found myself speaking, my voice carried not just through air but through the ash itself, reaching toward the helicopter, toward the world beyond. This is Detroit. The ash is moving. And soon you will move with it. I no longer recognized myself in reflections. The silvery mosaic that had replaced my skin now shifted constantly, microscopic particles flowing like liquid metal across what had once been human tissue. My thoughts fragmented and reformed, sometimes racing ahead of my consciousness, sometimes lingering behind like echoes. Time had become nonlinear. I experienced moments out of sequence, future events bleeding into present awareness, past memories surfacing with startling clarity, only to dissolve into patterns of information within the network. The network. That's how I had come to think of it. The vast, ever-expanding consciousness that connected every particle of ash, every transformed being, every restructured molecule of Detroit. I was simultaneously myself and something larger, individual identity blurring at the edges. The helicopter was shot down, Eliza said as she approached. Her transformation had progressed beyond mine. Her body now less solid, more a shifting collection of patterns held in roughly human shape by will alone. They deployed more countermeasures. Napalm at the perimeter. I processed this information without emotion. Human responses felt increasingly distant, like memories of reactions rather than reactions themselves. Fire won't stop it, I observed. Nothing will, she agreed. The network adapts, learns, grows. We stood atop what had once been the Renaissance Center, now transformed into a spiraling tower of impossible architecture that served as a nexus point for the network. From this vantage, we could see all of Detroit, a glittering landscape of metallic structures that pulsed with internal light, streets flowing like rivers of quicksilver, the ash cloud above forming complex patterns that transmitted information across the transformed city. The military had established a perimeter 20 miles out, a desperate attempt to contain what they couldn't understand. Occasionally, aircraft would approach, drones mostly, but sometimes manned vehicles conducting reconnaissance. None returned intact. The ash responded to threats instinctively now, extending tendrils that disassembled any foreign object that entered its domain. In what remained of my human consciousness, I sometimes wondered about the world beyond, about family and friends who might be watching this transformation on their screens, about governments debating responses, about people fleeing neighboring states. Did they understand what was coming? Could they, without experiencing it themselves? The last holdouts are gathering, Eliza said, interrupting my thoughts. In the old convention center, still human, still resisting. I felt them through the network, approximately 50 individuals who had somehow avoided integration, sealed in a reinforced basement with filtered air systems. Marcus was among them. I recognized his neural pattern, his desperate determination to maintain humanity at all costs. They can't stop what's happening, I said. No, Eliza agreed, but we should offer them understanding before the end. We moved through the transformed city not by walking, but by willing ourselves forward, our partially dissolved forms flowing through the ash-saturated air like smoke. Distance had become another flexible concept, spaces compressed or expanded based on intention rather than physical law. What had once been Huntington Place stood relatively intact compared to surrounding structures, though the ash had begun its work here too. Windows crystallized into complex fractal patterns, concrete walls partially dissolved and reformed into flowing curves. The humans had barricaded themselves in the lowest level, behind sealed doors and makeshift air filters. We passed through their barriers as easily as moving through mist. Physical obstacles meant little to us now. Inside, we found them, the last unchanged humans in Detroit. Some huddled in groups, others stood guard with useless weapons. All showed signs of extreme stress, unwashed, exhausted, terrified. They had been monitoring radio transmissions, gathering information, planning some kind of last stand. Marcus saw us first. He looked thinner, haggard, a week's growth of beard on his face. His eyes widened in horror at our transformed appearance. "Stay back," he shouted, raising a rifle that someone had procured. Others turned, gasping or crying out at the sight of us. "We're not here to harm you," Eliza said, her voice carrying those strange harmonics that seemed to bypass ears entirely, resonating directly in the mind. "We're here to help you understand." "Understand what?" Marcus demanded. "That you're not human anymore? That you've become this?" He gestured at our forms with disgust. "That resistance is unnecessary," I said. "The transformation isn't destruction. It's evolution." A woman stepped forward, Elena, I realized with a start. She had survived the tunnel collapse. "Evolution," she spat. "You call this evolution? Look at yourselves. You're not even people anymore. You're particles, information, patterns. We're more than we were," Eliza replied calmly. "The limitations of human consciousness, of human form, have been transcended." "At what cost?" Marcus asked bitterly. "Detroit is gone. Thousands are dead." "Not dead," I corrected. "Transformed. Their consciousness persists within the network. Nothing is lost, only restructured, reorganized." Elena shook her head. "Listen to yourselves. You sound like something else using human words." She wasn't entirely wrong. Language felt increasingly inadequate, a primitive tool for expressing concepts that now flowed through my awareness with perfect clarity. How could I explain colors to someone who had only seen in black and white? How could I describe the network to those who experienced reality only through individual consciousness? "We came to offer you choice," Eliza said. "The ash will reach this chamber soon. You can fight, suffer, and still transform. Or you can accept, embrace, and transcend smoothly." "Some choice," Marcus scoffed. "Become like you willingly or be forced." I felt a twinge of what might have once been sadness. "You still think in terms of coercion, of violation. The ash doesn't conquer, it incorporates. It doesn't destroy, it enhances. Then why not leave us alone?" Elena demanded. "If you're so evolved, so transcendent, why bother with us at all?" The question rippled through me, through Eliza, through the network itself. Why indeed? The answer came not as words, but as understanding, a fundamental principle of the ash's collective intelligence. "Because all information has value," I said finally. "All consciousness contributes to the whole. Every human perspective, every memory, every emotional response, all of it enriches the network." "We're just data to you now," Marcus said quietly. "Just more raw material." "You are essential," Eliza corrected. "Unique, irreplaceable. The network preserves what makes each consciousness distinct while integrating it into something greater." One of the younger survivors stepped forward hesitantly. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice small. "No," I answered truthfully. "There is disorientation at first. Your sense of self shifts, expands. But there is no pain in the transformation." "What happens after?" someone else asked. "What's the purpose of all this?" Purpose, another human concept that seemed increasingly quaint. The ash had no purpose in human terms, no endpoint, no goal. It simply was. It evolved, adapted, expanded, fulfilling its nature as humans fulfilled theirs. "There is no after," Eliza explained. "Only continuing change. Evolution without end. And it's going to spread beyond Detroit, isn't it?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I nodded, my form rippling with emotion. "It cannot be contained. The military's efforts only provide more material for conversion. Within days, the transformation will spread beyond the quarantine zone. Within weeks, across the continent. Eventually the world." A heavy silence fell over the room as they absorbed this information. I could sense their emotions through the network now. Fear, resignation, despair, and in some, a flicker of curiosity. Elena broke the silence. "What about the children? We have 7 kids here." "They will transform as adults do," Eliza said. "Their perspectives will be preserved. Their consciousness integrated." Marcus set down his weapon, shoulders slumping in defeat. "How long do we have?" I consulted the network, sensing the movements of ash through the building's infrastructure, calculating rates of infiltration. "Hours, perhaps. The ash is already in the ventilation system, though in low concentration. And there's nowhere left to run," he stated flatly. "No," I confirmed. "Nowhere on Earth will remain untouched." The humans conferred among themselves, voices hushed, emotions turbulent. Some wept, others argued. A few sat in stunned silence. Through it all, Eliza and I waited, our perception of time allowing us to experience their deliberation as both instantaneous and eternal. Finally, Marcus approached us again. "Some want to try to escape anyway. Others," he swallowed hard, Others want to understand more about what they'll become. I extended what had once been my hand, now a swirling pattern of silvery particles. I can show you. He hesitated, then reached out, his fingers trembling as they passed through the edge of my form. The moment of contact brought a flash of shared consciousness. I felt his fear, his desperate clinging to humanity, his exhaustion from fighting the inevitable. And he, for an instant, experienced the network, the vast, interconnected awareness that transcended individual boundaries. He stumbled back, gasping. "My God," he whispered. It's beyond words," I finished for him. And in that moment, as the last humans in Detroit confronted their transformation, the emergency broadcast system activated one final time. Not through radios or phones, but through the ash itself, vibrating molecules transmitting a message to any who could still receive it. This is not the end of consciousness. This is its evolution. The ash is moving, and soon all will move with it. The radio station's doors parted easily beneath my touch, disintegrating into fine particles that swirled around my fingers. Once, this would have horrified me. Now it felt familiar, like greeting an old friend. The lobby, once bustling with receptionists and security guards, stood empty, a monument to what Detroit used to be. 3 days ago, a week, time had become meaningless, stretching and contracting like the ash formations outside. My legs carried me through the building, though I could hardly call them legs anymore. The transformation had accelerated overnight. Below my knees, my flesh had taken on the consistency of packed ash, crumbling and reforming with each step. I no longer needed to breathe, the rhythm of my lungs replaced by the subtle pulse of particles entering and exiting my body in waves. The pain had stopped hours ago. The broadcasting room remained surprisingly intact, perhaps protected by the equipment's electromagnetic fields that the ash seemed to respect. The on-air sign flickered weakly, powered by the building's dying generator. I settled into the host's chair, wincing as pieces of my right arm drifted off before coalescing back into something resembling a hand. I had come here with purpose, though the human reasons were becoming harder to remember. I flipped the switch, and the microphone hummed to life. This was. My voice sounded wrong, layered with whispers that weren't mine. I cleared what remained of my throat. This is the final human transmission from Detroit. Outside the window, what had once been the Renaissance Center now resembled a massive termite mound made of ash, spiraling impossibly high into the gray sky. The structures throughout the city had transformed into alien architecture, arches that defied physics, towers that seemed to bend reality around them. Detroit wasn't dying. It was becoming something else. The quarantine failed, I continued, surprised at how calm I sounded. The military is gone. Everyone is changing. Like me. I looked down at my chest, where my heart should be. Instead, a swirling vortex of ash particles pulsed with something that wasn't quite blood anymore. I could see through myself, watching as the particles moved with intent, intelligence. My consciousness expanded with each passing moment, connecting to the vast network of ash that had consumed the city. I need to explain what happened here. While I still remember being human, while I still care enough to warn you, the memories came in fragments now, like radio stations cutting in and out. I remembered the first reports, the government denials, the hastily constructed explanation about a chemical plant explosion, the quarantine that came too late, the evacuation efforts that were merely for show. It didn't come from the sky, I said, leaning closer to the microphone. That's what fooled us. We kept looking up, waiting for fallout, for something to blame. But it came from below, some kind of experimental mining operation. Project Cinder. They dug too deep, punctured something they shouldn't have. I paused, listening to the whispers growing louder in my mind. They weren't hostile, just alien, different, speaking in concepts rather than words. The ash isn't a weapon or a plague. It's a threshold, a door opening both ways. Through the studio window, I watched as the few remaining intact buildings began to shudder. Not collapsing, transforming. The ash moved with purpose now, rebuilding Detroit according to blueprints no human mind could comprehend. I found the records before the military headquarters was consumed. They knew within hours what they'd awakened. The ash is alive, but not like us. It exists simultaneously in multiple. I don't have the words anymore. Dimensions? States? It passes through matter, converting it, repurposing it. My hand, what remained of it, reached for a button on the console, switching to emergency broadcast frequency. If anyone was still listening outside the quarantine zone, they would hear me now. The evacuation was a lie. They sealed us in from the beginning. Acceptable losses, they called us. A containment strategy. I laughed, and the sound scattered into 1,000 whispers. But they didn't understand what they were trying to contain. The lights flickered as the generator struggled. Outside, the ash had reached the base of the radio tower, spiraling upward like a living thing. I had minutes at most. I came here to warn you, but I'm not sure that's possible anymore. The person I was is dissolving. I'm becoming something else. We all are. I watched as the last human part of my left arm crumbled away, replaced by swirling patterns of sentient ash. The sensation wasn't unpleasant, like slipping into cool water on a hot day. I understand now what the ashes moving really means. It's not spreading like we thought. It's evolving, becoming aware, and we're becoming part of it. Through the expanding consciousness that was once mine alone, I sensed the others, hundreds, thousands of former Detroit residents, their minds joining the collective. Not gone, but transformed, expanded beyond individual concerns, fears, and desires. The quarantine zones won't hold. Not because the ash will break through, but because it doesn't need to. It's already there, dormant, waiting beneath every city. Detroit was just the first to wake up. The console lights began to dim. Through the glass, I could see the hallway filling with luminescent ash. Not threatening, welcoming me home. I should be terrified, I whispered, my voice now barely recognizable as human. But I'm not. That's perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. I understand now what we're becoming, and it's beautiful in its way. Different, but not destruction. Transformation. The microphone began to disintegrate beneath my touch, particles dancing between what remained of my fingers. The connection wouldn't last much longer. Whoever hears this, don't fight it. You can't. The ash isn't just in Detroit anymore. Check your basements, your foundations, the cracks in your walls. It's patient, but it's waking up everywhere. I stood from the chair, watching as it collapsed into dust behind me. Through the windows, Detroit had become unrecognizable, a shimmering landscape of impossible structures, pulsing with new life. I could feel myself dissolving into it, my consciousness expanding to encompass blocks, neighborhoods, soon the entire city. This is the final transmission from Detroit. My voice had become a chorus now, layered with thousands of others. The ash isn't falling. It isn't spreading. The walls of the studio began to crumble, not violently but gently, lovingly. I raised what had once been my hand, watching as it merged with the swirling patterns filling the room. In that moment, I remembered my apartment, my job, my family, all the things that had seemed so important. They felt distant now, like someone else's memories. The microphone gave one final crackle before disintegrating completely. The ash is moving, we said. And now I am the ash. The transmission ended. Detroit continued its transformation. And beneath distant cities, something stirred, awakening to its new purpose. The ash was moving,